A warm welcome to everyone today for joining us. My name is Emese Latkóczy. I'm the Executive Director of the Hungarian Human Rights Foundation. We're going to be using the webinar format today, which means that the participants' mics and cameras are turned off. And in order to pose your questions, we ask that you use the Q&A feature. My colleague will be gathering those, summarizing them if necessary, and then presenting them at the end when we have our Q&A section. We're here today to discuss with investigative journalist Gábor Czímer an astounding human rights violation that has been going on at least since 2008, as far as we are able to determine, in the very heart of Europe, in full view and intentionally ignored by most international players. We're talking about the current day retroactive application of certain long discredited Beneš Decrees from the World War II era that branded Czechoslovakia's Hungarian and German ethnic minorities collectively guilty for the war. So this means that the Slovak authorities can and have confiscated properties without compensation from individuals whose ancestors were either ethnic Hungarian or German. Our expert, Gábor Czímer, has for years dug deep into and researched and reported on this practice. He relies on the tools, first and secondary sources that he has available to him. Until recently, Mr. Czímer was a member of the editorial board of WWII, which is the Hungarian language daily newspaper in Slovakia. Recently, he joined a news portal called Moderator.sk. Both media outlets serve Slovakia's 462,000 strong Hungarian minority, which is nearly 10% of the population. Welcome, Mr. Czímer.
Hello, greetings from Slovakia. Thank you for the invitation.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts, I wanted to ask you if you could briefly delve into history and present the background and the demographics on the targets of this human rights violation, the Hungarian and German minorities. My colleague will be showing us some slides.
Okay, then to understand the human rights violations, we need to understand how the borders of the countries in the region have evolved and how the ethnic map of the countries have evolved. In 1914, the state that existed in this region was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You can see this state on the map. You can see the territory of the state in Central Europe. At the end of the First World War, after 1920, this monarchy fell apart into smaller states. One of these smaller states was Czechoslovakia. The next map, when we get it, you can see Czechoslovakia, the area of Czechoslovakia. Yes, after the First World War. However, as the following map shows, the ethnic map of the original Austro-Hungarian Empire was very fragmented and diverse. You can see the Hungarian ethnic population, the German one, the Czech, and so on and so forth. Therefore, the territory of the successor states, as like Czechoslovakia, was also ethnically diverse. The map, the next one, shows the German, the Hungarian, the Ukrainian, the Polish, and the Romanian minorities who originally lived in Czechoslovakia. To show you more precise data, let's see the ethnic data from the 1921 census. You can see that there were more than 3 million Germans, more than 700,000 Hungarians living in Czechoslovakia at that time. Yes. But after 1945, with the end of the Second World War, much changes. The re-established Czechoslovak state formulates the principle of collective guilt, which is very important for the understanding of the issues this webinar is about. According to this principle, Czechoslovakia holds primarily the German and Hungarian minorities living on its territory, responsible for the damage caused by the war. This principle of the collective guilt is formulated in the so-called Beneš Decrees. According to the decrees, ethnic Germans and Hungarians in Czechoslovakia were deprived of their citizenship and property rights. The Czechoslovak state, confiscated the land property of many ethnic Hungarians and Germans without compensation in this time. At the same time, many people were deported, forcibly expelled from their homes. Ethnic Germans were deported to Germany during this period. This is indeed the reason why there are only a few ethnic Germans living in the territory of nowadays Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. So a few years later, in the 1950s, however, these strong repressive measures were softened, but the confiscated land was not returned into its original owners. Then in the early 1990s, Czechoslovakia also fell apart and Slovakia was established. When we get the next map, yes, the map shows the territory of Slovakia, but this state is also ethnically diverse. When we get the next map, it shows where the ethnic Hungarians live in the country. You can see the ethnic Hungarians are in Slovakia basically a border minority. This community lives next to the Slovak-Hungarian border. However, as the following map shows, the number of Hungarians in Slovakia decreased in the second half of the 20th century. This is due to declining demographics and the assimilation of Hungarians into the Slovak majority. The last data I will show you shows the current ethnic composition of Slovakia. It shows that Hungarians in Slovakia are still the largest minority. You can see the second one is Roma, and also Czech minority is present in the country, and Russians too, and Ukrainians too. Turning now, so that was the last data which I tried to show you, and turning now to the main topic of our webinar, the human rights violation in Slovakia. It is very important to say that in today's Slovakia, the Beneš Decrees, which I mentioned earlier, are still in force. The Beneš Decrees are considered foundational to the re-establishment of Czechoslovak Republic and later the creation of the Slovak Republic. However, Slovak authorities claim that these decrees cannot be used today to create new legal states. They call them dead law. However, since 2008, the Slovak authorities have started to refer to these decrees in certain court cases. The Slovak authorities have initiated several lawsuits challenging the right of certain individuals to their land. They sued landowners whose ancestors were ethnic Hungarians or ethnic Germans living in the 1940s in the territory what's now Slovakia. The Slovak authorities claimed that the land should have been confiscated from the ancestors in the late 1940s, all because these ancestors were ethnic Hungarians or ethnic Germans. And because, for some reasons, the confiscation did not take place in the late 1940s. The Slovak authorities are now taking the land in question into state ownership. The Slovak state sees this as correcting an old administrative mistake today. In fact, the Slovak authorities are actively seeking documents in archives to prove that certain valuable pieces of land once belonged to an ethnic Hungarian or to an ethnic German individual. And if they find such a document, they will initiate a lawsuit to take the land from its present owner and make it state property. An interesting question is why confiscation did not take place in the late 1940s. In most of the cases, it took place, but it's an interesting question why it didn't take place in some cases in the 1940s. Perhaps we can discuss this in the Q&As.
Thank you very much for that thorough overview and background. I'd be curious as to how you personally became interested in this injustice.
I first started working on this topic when the European Court of Human Rights ruled in one of the cases. I wrote a longer article about this quite interesting case. Subsequently, in my further investigative work, I came across other cases. In these cases, however, the state wanted to take over much larger amounts of land from private individuals. And of course, in these cases, the monetary value is much higher too. Again, I want to underline that the state wants to confiscate this land without compensation.
So could you describe in more detail which precisely is the government authority or authorities that are carrying out these ethnically based land grabs? What's the mechanism they use to accomplish this? And how are they so-called justifying it, if at all?
Yeah. In the last 10 years, the scandal-ridden Slovak Land Fund, it's a state institution, a state fund. So the Slovak Land Fund actively searched its archives to looking for unfulfilled property confiscation orders based on the Beneš Decrees. And if they find one, the fund will try to correct the procedural omissions, saying that these properties have already been confiscated in principle, just the decision was not put into practice yet. And the state is now correcting this omission. So by its very nature, this legal basis targets individuals whose ancestors were ethnic Hungarians or ethnic Germans. The victims, that means who have inherited the property or the properties, are not necessarily even Slovak citizens today. The immigration was quite big in the second half of the 20th century. So the families who were affected by the Beneš Decrees and by these confiscations, the successors of these families often lived Slovakia or former Czechoslovakia.
So basically what you're saying that this whole process is akin to confiscating assets from descendants of Holocaust victims with the arguments that the Nazis didn't manage to take everything away from them at the time, so the state is now making up for it.
Yes, this is emphasized by the legal experts and the lawyers of the descendants. as a journalist, I put this question to the former Slovak Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ivan Korčok, and he replied that that there is no continuity between present-day Slovakia and the Nazi Slovakia. We have to mention that in this short period there was a kind of Nazi Slovakia state. So Ivan Korčok stated there is no continuity between nowadays Slovakia and the Nazi day Slovakia. However, my question was not about the continuity of states, but about the fairness of such practice.
So, as far as you're able to determine about what is the number of cases of the victims that we're talking about, and what has been your methodology to uncover the Slovak Land Fund's underhanded tactics, and have you hit any roadblocks in your investigations?
Yeah, it is very difficult to say exactly how many cases there might be. The Slovak Land Fund does not really provide precise data on this. A few years ago, together with my investigative colleagues, we managed to find out that from 2019 to 2022, the Land Fund initiated 600 cases on the basis of the Beneš Decrees. I have to add that not every piece of this 600 case is a court case. Some of the cases are not in the court stage, let's say. At my work, I used investigative journalist methods, so I just talked with my sources, and of course I had to process a lot of data, because the Land Fund didn't has any data which you can easy oversee and process. Yes, of course, and the obstacles. Of course, the biggest obstacles was that public bodies, mainly the Land Fund, the Slovak Land Fund, do not provide data on these cases.
What sort of money are we talking about? Is it stake? And also, it appears that there was a change in the state's tactics somewhere around 2018. If you would elaborate on that.
Sorry. I have to say we don't know the exact numbers, but we are talking about millions of euros. In 2019 alone, 631 pieces of land were taken into state ownership, which represents an area of 260 hectares. In 2020, 132 hectares were taken into state ownership in this way. The value of this land is several million euros. And yes, in 2018, there has been a change in the attitude towards the land under the motorway around Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. You know, the land under the motorways, under such big infrastructure is always very, very valuable. So what happened is that prior to 2018, the Slovak Land Fund approached property owners affected by the construction of the D4 motorway around Bratislava and bought them out. Most owners complied. It was in their interest. To give an example, agricultural land is worth about 2 or 4 euros per square meter, and about 60 or 80 euros per square meter was paid for the land under the motorway. thousands of smaller parcels were involved. Ethnic Slovak and ethnic Hungarian Slovak citizens were compensated, bought out, basically. But something happened around 2018. I think a bureaucrat must have figured out that if they invoke the Beneš Decrees, then they don't have to pay this very large sum of money to the landowners, at least to those landowners who had Hungarian or German ancestors. And the Slovak Land Fund began searching through the archives for outstanding confiscation orders.
Right. So as usual, it usually comes back to the money. And in the meantime, this whole situation has devolved into something quite sinister. So the state is denying that it's ethnically profiling. And you did say that the Slovak Land Fund doesn't really make its data readily available, yet at the same time, they've publicly admitted that they're performing these land confiscations, right?
Right. Confiscations were also taking place in current inheritance proceedings. The Ministry of Justice of Slovakia ordered the Slovak Chamber of Notaries to notify the Slovak Land Fund if they came across property that can be confiscated under the Beneš Decrees. I'm speaking from now, so it's happening now in Slovakia. But more recently, even through the Slovak Land Fund does not have the legal competence to do so. Its reach is far, and local level offices must have gotten instructions informally from higher up to stop all inheritance procedures where land under the motorway can be confiscated under the Beneš Decrees. Several lawyers told me that regional notaries are not registering new inheritance proceedings because that.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of lawyers, let's turn now to the three individual cases that are the most well known and that you have been following. What are the most recent, latest developments?
Yeah, there are, I have to say, I follow many cases, but these are the three which I gathered the most information about. I knew the lawyers, I'm attending the court cases and so on. So, and this summer it turned out that the state was going to the extremes to get its hands on valuable land under the Bratislava motorway, based on a confiscation order issued under the Beneš Decrees. Officials have taken this individual case to the Supreme Court to enforce a confiscation order issued in the late 1940s. The confiscation order was issued on the basis of the collective guilt of Hungarians and Germans. It was despite the fact that the court of the first and the second instance too had ruled in favor of the inheritors. So that was one of the cases which is very interesting, where the Slovak state tries everything to get this piece of land. Even the first and the second instance court decided in favor of the inheritors. In another case, in February this year, the court of the first instance decided to implement confiscation under the Beneš Decrees, which declared the collective guilt of Germans. So this case is about a German family, basically. Land under the Bratislava motorway, worth more than 400,000 euros, was confiscated by the court from a descendant of an Austrian family. The successor of the former owner is challenging the decision, of course, because the decision is not final now. And one of the most known cases is the so-called Bosic case. It started earlier, when I'm correct, in 2008. Yes, the case is going on since 2008. In this case, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of the descendant. The Slovakian courts followed similar decisions. And I think this case is slowly coming to the end, and Mr. Bosic will get the right to his property. From these cases, you can see that the Slovak courts are not ruling uniformly in these cases.
Right. But like you said, they recently lost twice at the lower levels. So you think they might just want to quietly let this issue go. Instead, the state has actually doubled down, and they've resorted to this extraordinary motion that they filed before the Supreme Court. So this is rarely used, my understanding, and it's a legal loophole that even the EU has reprimanded Slovakia on. In other cases that are unrelated. So I'd say this is quite a bold move, actually. I mean, they could, meaning the state could lose. Is there any date, by the way, anything for when the Supreme Court will hear that one case? Have you heard anything?
Not to my knowledge until now. So yes, also the information flow in these cases are very slow. So I have to contact all the lawyers, and ask them in which stage is their case actually, and so on. But I think there was. So I'm sure that it's not going to be a decision at the Supreme Court in the next month or half year or so. So. And yes, in one of the cases, the Slovak Land Fund applied to the Supreme Court, and yes, this legal tool, is not very common, and it was also criticized in other cases, not cases related to confiscations and Beneš Decrees, but in other cases, this tool was criticized by the EU because it violates some legal principles of the EU, and the EU tries to convince Slovakia to to abandon or rule out this legal tool. But in this special case, I think it's when even Slovakia does so in this special case, it's too late. Slovakia, the Slovak state, already implemented this extraordinary tool, let's call it so, to get the land property from these individuals, this individual. And of course, when we are speaking about Supreme Court issues, also politics kicks in. So it gets always a political questions how the state is seeing these cases, also through the Supreme Court.
Exactly. I mean, so you've presented a compelling case for this multi-pronged human rights violation that really should be evoking unequivocal and universal condemnation in the European Union, by the United States, other Western allies, and not to mention Slovakia itself. Actually, about 4 pieces have been published calling attention to this issue in established outlets, yet the silence continues to be deafening. Let's start with the European Union. How did Slovakia manage to be admitted to the European Union in 2004 with such discriminatory laws still in force?
Yes, that's a good question. When Slovakia joined the European Union, it was claimed that the Beneš Decrees no longer created new legal states. I mean, it was declared that the Beneš Decrees as kind of laws didn't create new stages, legal stages. So, yes, legal stages. They're considered, as I mentioned, the Slovak state claimed that the Beneš Decrees are kind of dead law, so they didn't have effects. Only in this way Slovakia was allowed to join the European Union. This was that the Beneš Decrees at this procedure when Slovakia joined the European Union were like a separate issue. So this was reflected. This problem was reflected. But yes, the European Union agreed with the Slovak standpoint that the Beneš Decrees didn't create any new effects, legal effects.
Right. So as we know, that's clearly not true. And as a matter of fact, fairly recently, in April of this year, some MPs posed a question to the European Commission on this. I'm going to summarize it, but I'd ask my colleague to show us the question and the response on a slide so everyone can read it for themselves. They mentioned the Vučić case, so the one that's been going on since 2008. They mentioned the Beneš Decrees, the inviolability of the Beneš Decrees that the Slovak parliament affirmed in September 2007. So after they were admitted to the European Union, and I may add when Robert Fico was prime minister the first time. And they also reference in Article 2 in the Treaty on the European Union. So the question they pose is the Commission willing to investigate possible violations of the fundamental right to property in Slovakia? And the answer.
And the Commission replied with the answer that the Commission considers that the Beneš Decrees are historical acts undertaken by the authorities of the former Czechoslovakia prior to accession to the EU and without continuing legal effects that would be contrary to EU law. That's basically the concept which I mentioned, but the answer continues. Therefore, this matter falls under the national competence, and it is for the Slovak authorities to ensure that fundamental rights are efficiently respected and protected in accordance with their national law and international human rights obligations. So that was the answer of the European Commission. But this answer ignores the reality and put back the issue to Slovakia itself. So it's a kind of solution that the European Commission doesn't want to deal with this issue. Putting aside the ethnic component, you would think there would be greater outcry against the practice of property confiscation and against being punished for something the owners of the land, so you had nothing to do with. in fact, in this case, the state did something against innocent civilians. But there is no domestic support from the Slovak majority to bring attention to this issue, or not much support from the Slovak majority to bring attention to this issue. It should be mentioned here that the state has never even issued an official apology for the atrocities committed against its own citizens in the end of the 1940s.
Right, which is very tragic indeed. So it's pretty evident that the EU, Slovakia, the US, they're content to let these individual cases just play out in the European courts over the course of years, decades. We look at the Bušić case, for example, rather than take any steps to address the systematic pattern of abuse that we're seeing here. So as a human rights organization, I mean, our position is maximalist. You know, we think the Slovak authorities should immediately cease implementing these decrees against innocent civilians. They should return the properties that were confiscated where that's possible, or provide monetary reparation. And they should, of course, nullify the legal instruments that make this whole abuse possible. However, based on what we've heard, this seems highly unrealistic. So in your experience, what would be a practical solution, perhaps a compromise that could de facto end this injustice? So what is the desire of the Hungarian community in Slovakia, and how do you see, maybe you could give some insight into this new Fico government, how are they going to handle this?
The lack of enforcement of the Beneš Decrees is a remote possibility, but only if the government receives either private or public pressure to that effect. So I think the Slovak government didn't do anything with these Beneš Decrees, with these problems during decades. They wouldn't do anything now when some pressure didn't emerge. It certainly wouldn't hurt if the U.S. State Department, for example, mentioned this human rights violation in its annual human rights practice report, as it inexplicably never has.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Czímer, for this thorough and insightful presentation. We're going to have a replay of this available in a few days that will make publicly known. And now I'd like to turn to any questions. Let me see. Let me check in with my colleagues. Hold on while I figure this out. Okay, I see a comment. No. Okay, last call for questions. Well, we have a little time. You mentioned something that we might address in the questions. Yes, if you'd want to get back to that.
Yeah.
Before we conclude.
I was speaking about that, the series of the historical event was that the Second World War came to its end, and the re-established Czechoslovak Republic claimed guilty the ethnic Hungarians and ethnic Germans who lived in the Czechoslovak territory for the damage of the war. That's because the confiscations started in these years, but some confiscations were going until and they wasn't finished, and it's a very interesting question why. So I managed to identify two regions in Slovakia. One is around Bratislava, the capital city, and one is further in the countryside, where a lot of because these confiscations affected hundred thousands of people. I mean, hundred thousands of families, and in some regions there were confiscated very little property. So somehow the local community in this region around Bratislava and furthermore in the countryside managed to somehow prolong to the unknown, the confiscation which affected them. So I don't know how they managed to do it. Maybe that were the years after the war. So administrative capacities were like a luxury. I mean, it was a destroyed country, and maybe these people in these two regions, they knew when they maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years managed to prolong the procedure of the confiscation, then this confiscation issue, let's say, the state will stop basically the confiscations, and in this way they save their property. I'm clear. It's understandable, which I'm trying to.
Yes, it is. It's very clear.
And I don't know how they manage it. Maybe and it's seen that precise two regions. There are the confiscation cases in these two regions. There are very few which they came actually to the end. In other regions, the most of the regions, when the authorities begin a confiscation, they took it to the end. But in these two regions, I don't know how. Maybe the people there had connections in the government, or I don't know.
I was going to say it was probably an inside job, and it's a good question for historians if Slovakia would like to look at its past squarely in the face. We do have a question, and I remind everyone to pose their questions in the Q&A. But let me find this question. I think this is a comment. I'm not seeing. Oh, the Hungarian-Slovak Joint Committee for the Problems of National Minorities has discussed this issue. What have you heard about, I guess, their deliberations and their proclamations? You could comment on that. So that's the official Hungarian joint between Hungary and Slovakia.
Yes, so there is a community, the committee to this real a diplomatic committee,
right?
Are like communicating through this committee, and in 2 years ago, when I'm correct, yes, maybe 2 years ago, this committee had his annual usual meeting, and the Hungarian partner, the Hungarian side of this mixed committee, put the question of the Beneš Decrees on the table. And the members of the committee, I mean the Hungarians and the Slovak diplomats get such a big arguing, let's say. So it wasn't like a decent diplomatic committee, you know. There were like very big problems emerging on this meeting, as big that the two sides didn't sign the closing book or the closing document, let's say, the closing document of this meeting. So it was a really big confrontation in this committee. And after that, I mean, like maybe a year ago or 10 months ago or something like that, the committee had another meeting, and the members kind of agreed that they signed this closing document, but the standpoints of one and the other side, I mean the Hungarian side and the Slovak side, were not getting closer. Every side just states its own standpoint, and it was written in the closing document, and the other side signed it too. But yes, it caused quite big diplomatic problems in this committee.
Right. So actually, staying with Hungary, we have another question, a related question. I guess I would say probably since that last meeting of the joint committee, where it was clear that the sides are very far apart. The question is, has Prime Minister Orbán engaged directly with Prime Minister Fico on this issue? Do you have any knowledge of that? So the fact that they have a close relationship, might this offer new opportunities to make progress on the issue?
I have no information that Prime Minister Orbán and Prime Minister Fico discussed this topic. And I think no one has such an information, except when it happened, then these two gentlemen. Because it's a very sensitive topic between the two countries and between the two governments too, because one of the previous Fico government was that which enforced the untouchability of the Beneš Decrees, which there was a voting in the Slovak parliament where the MPs of the Fico party was voting for a statement that the Beneš Decrees are untouchable. And in the communication of Mr. Orbán and Mr. Fico, this topic, as far as I know, as far as I remember, never emerged. There's another case that in the communication of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary and Slovakia, this topic emerged. But that's not an issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So yes, you're just reiterating that basically these Beneš decrees are sacrosanct, and probably the most that we can hope for is just that they're not enforced, at least in the foreseeable future. That's what we can hope for. But even to achieve that, we would need international, whether public or private, like you said, pressure to be applied. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. For certain, we would like to have you back regularly to report on any developments in these legal cases, perhaps in the next year. And there's, of course, other issues that affect the Hungarian minority. So we could possibly talk about that as well. Let me just take one more look if there are any additional questions. And I don't see any, so I wish everyone a very good day. And coming up soon, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays to everyone. And we'll have the replay ready in a few days so that you can share it with everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Czímer, for joining us. And we have thank yous coming in. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good day.